I'm best described as a kind of editor at large most of the time, and I think about that as, you know, I always wanted to be a photographer, and I studied photography and art history in university, and I got to New York working as a photo assistant, and what I realized that photography was the conduit to all this other stuff, mostly travel, mostly food, sometimes a decent date, you know, like that was what photography was for me. And then I pursued the career aggressively, and then as the digital world changed, I realized that I had to kind of reinvent myself a little bit, because I saw the writing on the wall with that, right? I saw that there was less craft, there was more people in the playing field, but I always realized my strength was the ideas behind the imagery, or what I saw when I was out there traveling around with I was much better served with my ear to the ground. And I think that's how that led into a very natural entry into being a magazine editor. And also I had a lot of people around me that were very supportive of that. Like, you know, that just doesn't happen to everybody. You have to have people willing to take the chance. Like, oh, you're a photographer, and like suddenly we're going to trust you to develop story ideas. Like, that takes trust and friendship, right? And I had a lot of that in my life. So, and then also I was always really scrappy. Like, I always knew that my interest was not one thing. So I always looked at things with kind of a shotgun view rather than a sniper view. And that diversity, I think, not only kept my interest going, but allowed me to have probably more longevity in my career in terms of being able to navigate photography, film, writing, and kind of editing and curating stories. So it came out of a need just to kind of always be working and have a job. Like, I never had a real job in my life, you know, like I always was like, you know, when I hear of friends who had these steady jobs and they're like, oh, boo, my job, I lost my job. You're like, dude, I lose my job every week. Like, you become resilient and bulletproof to that, and you understand that, like, okay, this is done, like, what's the next thing? And I think that, for me, was a great way to navigate a quote-unquote career. So, I mean, I've been working with Condé Nast as a brand, as a photographer for 20 years. But I would say in the last 5 years, when my very good friend Pilar Guzman and Yolanda Edwards, my wife, you know, they took over the helm of the magazine, this was 5 years ago, I had just been coming off about a year of doing television, waiting for, you know, what was going to happen with that. And they basically were looking for somebody to cover the watch market and the men's style market. And they looked at me and they were like, well, you're not doing anything. Like, you know, why don't you do this for us? And I was like, that sounds like fun. And it was a lot of fun. And I actually think I found my pacing and shorthand with them, because we already were friends in relationships working together. So there was a level of trust. And also, as me as a photographer, I could say, I could be at location X and be like, okay, the context of a word story is here. Like, this is a great travel story. And because I had the visual reference, I could say, and I know it will photograph beautifully and be a cover and a blah, and da da da. So they got a lot of bang out of their buck with that. And I always was traveling with cameras, and they would just be like, shoot it. Like, and then, you know, that was a great way to work, because I'd much rather photograph the stuff that I am kind of producing rather than really work for anybody else. The first piece I did with Condé Nast was, I mean, that's tough, because it could have easily been something that I found, a story that I found that was photographed by somebody else. Like, early on, I remember we were kind of trying to find our voice with the magazine, and I thought, like, we shouldn't abandon a very big part of Americana, which was camping. And I was out there looking at these really cool, like, cutting edge, like, camper designs, like from Airstreams, the very traditional one, to this, like, guy who was like a NASA aeronautical engineer. And I was like, that's a cool story, but I don't want to shoot it. Like, there are people out there better than me to shoot that. And I ended up shooting with a great photographer that I really admire, named Christopher Griffiths. And that was one of the first big features that we did that I didn't shoot, but I conceptualized, produced, and kind of art directed, whatever. And, you know, that's actually a lot more fun on many ways than having the responsibility of shooting the story yourself. And you're not schlepping cameras around there. You just show up. It's so much more fun. I mean, recently I just worked on this Petrosyan story with, again, I didn't shoot it. It was with a friend of mine named Otter Thorson who photographed it. And I met the Petrosyans on a press trip. And that's when I first went to the Georges V. And I fell in love with those guys. Like, I always knew about Petrosyan. I always knew the caviar was amazing, and I love caviar, but I didn't know it was this kind of intimate mom and pop owned shop. I mean, I thought it was like some big luxury brand, LVMH owned, blah, blah, blah. Then you meet these guys, and it's like, the history's cool. It's a great immigrant story. It touches on all those emotional things that we love about food, and it connects it to this single family that's been doing it since, I don't know, 1911 or something, 1920, something like that. And I just was in love with it. I'm in love with those guys. And when you walk into like the caviar tasting room and they're pulling out like kilo tins of beluga and stuff like that, you're like, pinch me, this is the job. Like, this is amazing. And Otter and I share the same kind of passion, for food and drink. And to do that with him was a really lot of fun because it was so decadent, but then again so wholesome. So it was a very weird combination. But no, I like that kind of storytelling. I like that kind of brand history storytelling. And then, of course, anytime there's a fly fishing story, I'm in. So the William Brown Project, as it started, was I have this farm in upstate New York. It's a 130 acre farm. It's like 2.5 to 3 hours from New York. And it was a part of a huge dairy farm, a 500, 600 acre dairy farm. And it's on William Brown Road. And when I was starting the blog, I was also raising pigs with a neighbor of mine. And I was making kind of illegal charcuterie and stuff, like rillettes and bacons and all this stuff. And a guy that I knew had this little wine shop and wanted to start selling it. And he was like, we should just sell this at the shop. I need a label. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll just call it William Brown Farms. And I made a little label and the ingredients, stuff like that. And then when I was starting the blog, I had this photo career. So I wanted this blog to be separate than Matthew Hranek photography, which was often the trend. People were just like creating websites and blogs based on their photo or art careers, whatever. So I was like, well, what could we call this? And so much of the lifestyle experiment that I was exploring up there, food, drink, and otherwise, was at the farm. So we were like, well, and it really was a diary. It kind of started as a diary. And we just said, well, why don't we call it the William Brown Project? Like, if you dug deep, you realized there was a connection to me, but it wasn't obviously me. And there also was this, I don't know, this air of this unknown character that I liked, which was William Brown. And it just kind of took off. And then every other alias that I created based on that was on that. And then before you know it, you can't abandon it because you've somehow created this brand idea. And William Brown also has a nicer ring than Matt Hranek, which is like, that's why my wife kept Edwards. Like, there's like complexity in that. And I liked the idea of this overarching kind of personality that could be whatever it wanted to be. So the watch book was a big one, and it's been, thankfully and humbly, it's been a very big success, and I'm going to work on A Man in His Car now. So stay tuned for that one. And, I think, again, my scrappy mentality is always thinking about, what's next. Like, I love telling brand stories. I think there's a big part of what I'd like to do is, I think social media is so great in terms of how that messaging gets out there, but a lot of the time you kind of need someone to shepherd you down that path. Like, I always see myself as a very good shepherd in that idea, particularly with brands with history and great DNA that in my opinion is an easy way to get messaging out there. That part I really enjoy. And, I haven't put down the camera. It's just more specific.